finished shooting a film here in the US about the best UFO cases and what they suggest might be going on. We looked at the Tic Tac encounter and the Ariel School Zimbabwe case, for example, amongst others. This Best UFO Cases film was actually the middle of three. The other two films, shot in our studio in Sussex, England, ask and answer the really important questions. What do they want? Are they friendly? How do they think? What's their agenda? If you haven't already watched that mini-series of 3 films about UFOs and what they're doing here, I suggest you do, because they genuinely add a new perspective to the discussion. And there's no hype, waffle or bullshit. There'll be links for these films in the description box below. Our schedule for shooting this middle film went to plan, taking just 3 out of our 4 weeks in the US, ending up here at White Sands, New Mexico. We anticipated this might happen, that there could be sufficient time left to do a bit of extra filming. To be crystal clear, our view is that some UFOs are real solid objects, unidentified craft or probes from elsewhere. We're not gullible idiots, but the evidence is compelling. The US government's own wording includes technology surprise and unknown unknowns. The Roswell incident is the most famous of all the UFO cases, an alleged crash that happened 60 miles northwest of here as the crow flies. There's no doubt whatsoever that something crashed and was found. Everyone acknowledges there was wreckage or debris. The million-dollar question is, of what? The Roswell incident has become legendary, with public interest peaking around the mid-1990s. The Hollywood blockbuster Independence Day was released in 1996, with a hilarious scene taking place on Air Force One as the nasty aliens are attacking Earth. One of the main characters asks, "What about that spaceship you found in New Mexico? What was it called?" "Roswell." To which the president replies, "Contrary to what you may have read in the tabloids, there is no Area 51. There is no spaceship." The Defence Secretary interrupts, saying, "Excuse me, Mr. President, that's not entirely accurate." Here in Roswell today, the tourism theme is all about spacecraft and aliens. There's a UFO museum, plus various gift shops, of course. The city's McDonald's is shaped as a spaceship. And if you're staying overnight, one smart motel owner invites you to crash here. It all began way back in July 1947 when Matt Brazel found some puzzling debris here on what used to be the Foster Ranch. We first have to understand that America was trying to get to grips with reports of flying saucers. The previous month, Kenneth Arnold, a respected businessman and private pilot, saw 9 unknown metallic craft flying in formation near Mount Rainier in Washington state. He estimated they were travelling at a minimum speed of 1,200 miles per hour. Several witnesses on the ground corroborated his story. Hundreds of similar sightings were reported to the media over the next few weeks. It must also be appreciated that the Second World War had only recently finished, and America was increasingly concerned about the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. Military staff were willing to keep quiet if ordered to do so, putting the needs of their country beyond any personal considerations. It was a different world to nowadays. Life was simpler, and technology was at a much earlier stage. Anyway, Matt Brazel, an old-fashioned Western cowboy who didn't say much, took some of the debris he'd found to the local sheriff in Roswell, and the sheriff called the military. 2 officers from the Roswell Army Airfield followed Brazel back to the ranch, inspected the crash site here, and gathered up more of the debris. The Roswell Daily Record newspaper initially reported that a flying saucer had been captured on a ranch in the Roswell region and that the disc had been flown to military headquarters. But the story quickly changed to it just being the remains of a weather balloon. And that was it, until 31 years later. Then, in 1978, a frail and elderly Jesse Marcel, the former intelligence officer who had come out here to the Foster Ranch, claimed the debris he'd seen and collected was from a UFO, that it was not from this world. One UFO enthusiast jumped on board, followed by another, then another and another. By the late 1980s, additional witnesses were being tracked down and interviewed. more than 40 years after the event had happened. A few of these witnesses told bits of intriguing detail, including how the thin metal foil that had been found was unusually tough and would miraculously unfold after being crumpled. They might have been recalling what they remembered, but equally they could have been telling the UFO enthusiasts what they wanted to hear, perhaps influenced by hoax stories of flying saucers crashing in the desert that did the rounds in the late 40s and early 50s. The best publicised of these hoaxes was the so-called Aztec crash. It supposedly occurred here in 1948 in the far north of New Mexico State, a few miles away from Aztec. 16 dead aliens were allegedly recovered by the military, as well as their spacecraft. The two men involved with the hoax, who sold fake alien technology, were convicted of fraud in 1953. Some folks, to this day, nevertheless believe the Aztec UFO crash actually happened. Wild stories like this have been around for ages, adding to a cultural narrative that the government must be hiding stuff from us, further blurring the line between fact from fiction. As the various UFO enthusiasts desperately talked to any kind of witness they could find, several competing versions emerged of what was supposed to have occurred northwest of Roswell in July 1947, involving a number of different crash sites. Obviously, these stories couldn't all be true, if any. Everything had rapidly got messy, with the rife competitiveness between the UFO buffs fueling and complicating the growing silliness. Any caution that might have been lurking in these investigations quickly gave way to finding the next big breakthrough in uncovering the truth. Books were being written, and annual UFO conventions needed speakers to bring in the paying crowds. The pressure to deliver was on, inviting sloppiness and idle speculation. It wasn't long before claims of dead bodies and even a live alien that had survived for a year were being taken as gospel by the believers. This was America, a country whose military will go to extraordinary lengths to recover an injured or dead US soldier from behind enemy lines. Yet the aliens apparently did sod all, despite people commonly seeing several of their craft flying in formation. They just left their unfortunate colleague alone with the humans until he died. No rescue mission, no contact or negotiation with the authorities to get him back. Nothing. And we're supposed to believe such crap, despite the visitors having advanced technology way beyond our capabilities. Of course, several key witnesses were eventually exposed as blatant liars. They'd faked documents and told fibs to get their 15 minutes of fame in the spotlight. Many others had jumped on the bandwagon, claiming little, adding nothing new, just wanting to be part of the show. That said, a handful of witnesses remain more or less credible. Jesse Marcel had shown his young son, Jesse Marcel Jr., bits of the debris, having arrived back home late at night before taking it into the base the following morning. It was eventually admitted by the Marcel family that Jesse Sr. had become an alcoholic, and investigators found he'd made other statements about his time in the military that were demonstrably false. So the accuracy of his testimony about what crashed at Roswell was in some doubt. Jesse Marcel Jr. was obviously an honourable man who sincerely believed he had handled material originating from beyond our planet. But, at the same time, he conceded his memory from childhood was sketchy, as it would be many decades on. We've written an article on our evolvefirst.org website about the unreliability of witness testimony. Eyewitnesses to a crime, for example, frequently get things wrong, failing to agree with one another about details or even basic facts. Human testimony is known to be fallible, notoriously unreliable. The police and legal profession understand this, having seen it happen with witnesses on numerous occasions. There are all kinds of personal bias which influence someone's perception and judgment of a situation. Memory distortion and confabulation is a recognised psychological effect that can be thought of as honestly lying. Add to this the problem of memory after decades of time passing by, together with the influx of related information from other sources, and you're asking for trouble. Yes, liars muddy the water, but good people who want to be helpful can unwittingly do likewise. Whilst I'm asking awkward questions, this whopper can't be ignored. What are the chances that an extraterrestrial craft would crash? After all, if they're real and here, which some genuinely seem to be, they're obviously capable of travelling vast distances through space at great speed. And they're presumably very experienced at moving about, using super reliable advanced technology. Let's go further. We won't be the first planet they've been to. Their civilizations could easily be hundreds of thousands of years ahead of where we are. They'll have developed a level of capability way beyond our current level. Of course, the aircraft and rockets that we make and use sometimes do go wrong and crash. But we're absolute beginners, not far on from using horses to get from A to B. They're not us. So the suggestion that one or more of their craft have been knocked out of the sky by a lightning strike during a thunderstorm or through interference from our radar technology is in all likelihood preposterous. We can't see this realistically happening. Before going any further, we need a quick look at how governments work. They're burdened with heaps of annoying bureaucracy, a fair bit of which is completely unnecessary. It's just accumulated down the years, layer upon layer. This makes government departments painfully slow to act. At best, they're miles away from being effective and efficient. At worst, they're inept. Whereas outstanding individuals can occasionally be found, the wheels of government are mainly kept moving by a mass of reluctant pen pushers. If the numerous staff have expertise in anything, it's clock watching, passing the buck and appearing to be busy whilst doing as little as possible. At least that's a pretty good description of how things are in Britain, and I'm guessing it isn't much different here in the US, because people are people. So there's one hell of a lot of incompetence. Commonly, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Additionally, there are cliques, jealousies, infighting and much more. Those with an eager eye on career enhancement, always wanting the next promotion, are sharper than average. They perfect the art of saying, writing and doing the right things, playing it safe, and this further clogs up the wheels with even more gunk. Any government or military defence department would be reluctant to admit that unknown craft of superior technological capabilities were flying around their airspace with impunity, because they'd be putting themselves in a very tricky position. Journalists and others would obviously ask a heap of awkward questions, and they wouldn't let up. Of course, we're now finally getting to the point where the US authorities are admitting exactly this, but only after many decades of denial, ridicule and obfuscation. Yes, governments do keep secrets, often rightly so because of national security. And yes, of course, they should simultaneously be more transparent whenever possible. Could they have kept the acquisition of recovered extraterrestrial technology quiet over the past 75 years or so? We think they could, theoretically, with any material stashed away by an offshoot of the military-industrial complex. Government officials would have been kept out of the loop as much as possible, with any clandestine group probably operating outside of today's regulations, even breaking current guidelines. Such a waived, unacknowledged special access programme with the task of studying an off-world craft, or parts thereof, would have minimal or possibly no effective oversight. This would be imperative to maintain complete secrecy, as well as to provide official deniability. The potential military advantages of being the first country to gain from such breakthrough technology would be massive, hard to exaggerate, thereby justifying any extreme secrecy. We're not implying this is the case, merely stating that such a scenario could possibly happen. More likely, however, the indications of a government UFO cover-up might be more easily explained. And my use of the term cover-up here is referring to anything to do with UFOs. It could all boil down to nothing more than the usual incompetence and departmental infighting, etc. We know that well-placed individuals can influence policy, one way or another, whether they're for or against any particular project or viewpoint. Again, this could explain much of the inconsistency down the years, including those tantalising clues of what might or might not have been going on behind the scenes. A lot of the speculation and conspiracy nonsense relies on interpretation, and that should sound alarm bells. It's just not solid ground, sufficient to build firm foundations that reliably hold up. This matter of the ins and outs of government bureaucracy leading to mixed messaging is almost certainly part of any answer. By contrast, the possibility that off-world technology is in the possession of the US government or some offshoot would seem to be unlikely, although this can't be ruled out. Indeed, a few credible individuals are suggesting there is such a reverse engineering program, hidden well out of sight, and this could be exposed in forthcoming congressional hearings. Time, of course, will tell. Back to Roswell. What was that debris found by Matt Brazel here in the New Mexico desert? Enthusiasts have searched all over this site with metal detectors, hoping to find fragments of whatever crash that the military might have overlooked decades earlier. But they found nothing that's genuinely interesting or convincing. The US Air Force were pushed to formally investigate on behalf of the General Accounting Office after a New Mexico congressman had officially raised the matter. There'd been huge public interest in Roswell, with disquiet that secrets might be being kept. A long and comprehensive report was released in July 1994. They ruled out the possibility of it being an aircraft crash, an errant missile or rocket, or any kind of nuclear incident. They also officially stated that their research found absolutely no indication that it was an extraterrestrial craft. They looked into assertions by pro-UFO writers concerning specific military activity in 1947, refuting such claims as completely unfounded. The official report concluded that the debris was most likely from a high-altitude Project Mogul balloon train, launched from here at what's now known as the Holloman Air Force Base, next to White Sands. It flew in an east-northeast direction, towards the Foster Ranch. Project Mogul was a then-sensitive classified program to determine the state of Soviet nuclear weapons research. And if you look dispassionately, objectively, at the description of the debris provided by the very few original key witnesses who can be trusted, it does closely fit. Yes, they might have subsequently believed that what they saw or handled was from a flying saucer. And, yes again, it doesn't fully explain the claims that some of this material allegedly had unusual qualities. But in all other respects, it does match up. Some UFO proponents argue back that Mogul was a lame excuse, and that the test flight most probably responsible was cancelled and hadn't taken off. The government were involved in a cover-up, and therefore this report was part of concealing the truth. Or perhaps those in the know weren't telling the officers investigating what really happened in 1947. Others, however, accepted that the Project Mogul balloon and associated apparatus was a reasonable explanation. The US Air Force investigators looking into the Roswell incident found that Sheridan Cavett, the officer who accompanied Jesse Marcel to the Foster Ranch, was still alive. Their interview with him was recorded, and he provided a signed and sworn statement about what he remembered, that it was some kind of a balloon and attachments. Furthermore, he stated he had never taken an oath or signed any agreement not to talk about the incident, nor had he been threatened by anyone in the government or told to keep quiet. Irvin Newton was likewise located and interviewed. He was the weather officer at Fort Worth where the collected debris had been flown to. He recalled that when he saw it, he giggled at the idea of it being parts of a flying saucer, instead immediately recognising it as parts of a weather balloon or similar, plus trailing material. Tellingly, he stated, "While I was examining the debris, Major Marcel was picking up pieces and trying to convince me that some notations on the sticks were alien writings." Newton confirmed there were figures on the sticks, lavender and pink in colour, that appeared to be weather faded. And we're about to get to this. Both men stated they'd been repeatedly contacted by UFO authors, then quoted and misquoted. The reported alien writings or hieroglyphics on the sticks, coloured lavender and pink, matched almost exactly with the reinforcing tape used as part of the Mogul balloon array. It had been purchased from a New York City toy factory, and the symbols on the tape were abstract flower-like designs made to appeal to kids. The sun fading effect on this tape would probably have blurred the symbols, which already resembled hieroglyphics. You can see these symbols by looking at our thumbnail for this film. Witnesses had said the sticks were like balsa wood, but stronger. The construction of the Mogul balloon arrays used balsa wood beams coated in a thick glue to enhance their durability. There's a well-known saying that might be appropriate to quote here. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. Human psychology, in its current form, is plagued by cognitive bias. People usually take sides, adopting a particular position or belief, sometimes quickly. Then they most often continue to justify it. They find it easier to keep on believing what they've asserted, even in the face of growing evidence to the contrary, rather than hold their hands up and admit they got it wrong. Both sides of a dispute are commonly guilty of this behavioural flaw or weakness. Believers want to believe, and debunkers are absolutely convinced that it's impossible for extraterrestrial spacecraft to be here. Both sides usually adopt rigid positions. Even when someone appreciates this strong psychological tendency, it's still difficult to rise above taking a certain position on an issue. A person's sense of self-identity and self-worth is invariably tied in with what they believe or disbelieve. We all want to believe in something. It might be love, the possibility of our favourite sports team doing better this season, or in a deeper meaning and purpose. It's part of having a dream, a vision of something better, of higher expectation. Overall, it's a good quality, but this attribute also makes us vulnerable to bias. There's no escaping this until everyone learns critical thinking skills, recognises the importance of an evidence-based approach, and trusts the resulting understanding. It's essential to have an unquestionable quality of evidence as a starting point. In the case of Roswell, it was already far too late in the 1980s and 90s, let alone now. Memories, already suspect, had faded and probably been contaminated. Crucial witnesses, principally Mac Brazel, were dead. The materials in question were unavailable, probably long since discarded, unless they were extraterrestrial in origin, in which case they'd be hidden well out of sight. We may never know for absolute certainty what caused the debris field here on the Foster Ranch. So all we can do is make our best individual judgments, recognising that we cannot know for sure after all this time, and then move on. One of the most passionate proponents of the extraterrestrial explanation for Roswell now admits that he's nowhere near as convinced as he was 25 years ago. And that's in context of him rejecting Project Mogul as a possible explanation, which could be a vital mistake in judgment. The sensible position is to recognise that better evidence is needed. Evidence which can be carefully scrutinised by all. The 2004 Tic Tac case has thankfully taken the discussion about UFOs a step further forwards. Mainstream science must next overcome their considerable bias, going beyond the stigma and taboo associated with this subject. Governments should use their high-tech military capabilities to find out what's going on, studying technology surprise and unknown unknowns. If visitors from elsewhere are here, watching our often unflattering adolescent bumblings, then we need to identify and monitor their presence. Whereas witness testimony cannot and should not be ignored, surveillance by using modern technology is the way forwards, simply because it eliminates the uncertainty of human bias. We've already covered, in our mini-series of 3 films about UFOs and their agenda, what we think is going on. We've answered the crucial questions like how do they think? Are they friendly or hostile? What do they want? And why are they here? Our contribution to the discussion is original and no nonsense, making good use of our specialist know-how. Again, there'll be a link to these films in the description box below. So that's it. We can't be certain, but based on the currently available facts, the Roswell incident probably wasn't as important as some have claimed.